Hey Ben, what do you call an Italian guy who learns how to fly?
Super Dario!
Hey, there we go. Very nice. Welcome everyone to the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. This episode we're talking about the 2019 World Series of Poker Main Event. I'm one of your hosts, East Coast Sam.
And I'm your other host, Legend of Ben on Poker Stars. And here we are, almost caught up. We're getting there
I
for
know, right?
basically our 1 year anniversary episode of this podcast. And we're talking about one of the most bizarre, in my opinion, one of the worst,
Yes.
but one of the most entertaining to analyze after watching main events in main event history. This is the most unusual way to really experience this main event. So many changes. 2018 had sort of kept up the facade of it being in a standard episode of the main event. This one switches gears and makes it more of a, let's just excise 45 minutes from the live broadcast feed and put that in an episode, and then there you go. Let's have 15 of those.
Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting one to watch because I remember this very vividly. I watched this whole thing live, and I saw a lot of it while it was being broadcast live because that summer I was working at home. So I was able to watch a lot of the coverage as it was happening. So I was very curious to see how they're going to handle it, the edited version this time, and to have literally just 45-minute blocks of the stream with very little editing. There's a couple little things that they change around that we'll get into, but just 45-minute blocks. It's just such an unusual decision on their part. Obviously, it's the easiest thing for them to do, to just lightly edit the stream. And I don't necessarily mind a lightly edited version of the stream. I really like Jamie Kerstetter as a commentator. We'll get into that, I'm sure. But the hand selection is just so odd.
So, for the most part, when they select hands in the edit of an episode of the main event, usually there's something to the hand, whether it's some action, big hand versus big hand, a big bluff, a big, meltdown, table talk, controversy, something.
Yeah.
So when so many of your hands are raise pre-flop, take it down, raise, big blind calls, checks flop, check folds to a bet by the pre-flop raiser, like just over and over. I don't care if it's the most entertaining poker player in the world. If that's the entirety of the hand you're showing, that's just not entertaining for me. And even worse is that while there's kind of two halves of the coin. There's an entertaining hand, and there's just good solid poker play being played. But when ace four from the button raises, king 10 defends, the flop comes ace 3-6, the king 10 checks and the ace 4 bets, and then the hand's over. That's not entertaining in any level.
Right.
That's the biggest problem. And that's just one of the many problems in this main event that we'll get into. But before we go all the way down that rabbit hole, let's start from the top here. So the 2019 main event 3 years ago, the second biggest field of all time behind 06, 8,569 players, and even 10 million for first place. So if you remember in 2014, Martin Jacobson won 10 million for first place in a smaller field, but that was when they had still just 10% of the field. So by having 15%, you have to have more players to result in that top prize, which they now were able to do. This was kind of the 50th anniversary main events. So that's a pretty prominent graphic in a lot of the, Poker Go visuals for some of the episodes, introductions and whatnot. And there were a couple of big tournament changes as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an odd, here you are, 50th anniversary of WSOP, and here you are with, all this attention on the second biggest field of all time, just behind Jamie Gold's event. You'd expect there to be more resources behind it. You expect there to be more excitement and energy behind it. And it's just very odd.
But getting back to the tournament changes, we have a 60K starting stack, which was up 1,000 from the last handful of main events prior. The big blind ante now in effect, which would speed the game up. We've talked to a couple of the guys I've interviewed about, it speeds up the game of antes not having to be like collected by the dealer.
Right.
The big blind puts it out, and that puts some slight short stack gameplay strategic moves in effect because it affects your stack as it kind of hits that 5 big blinds and below. That the math changes dramatically. Unfortunately, that never really plays a factor at any point during this main event. No one ever really gets that short for that to really matter in any of their decision making. And opposite, we have Jamie Kerstetter in the booth with Lon and Norm. Kara Scott back from maternity leave from the year prior, so she does conduct some interviews here and there. No more Joe Stapleton. That's always a plus. And then because this is kind of a excised, abridged version from the live feed on PokerGo/ESPN, we have all the graphics and style that comes with that. So that includes having the chip counts at the top of the screen, but rather than being in chip order, it's shown by seat order, which
Right.
I guess makes sense. But
Yeah.
then I kind of liked having the chip stacks go from smallest to biggest, at least for the final table.
Mm-hmm.
Final table, I like that. For the days up until that, I guess I would be okay with that, because then goes full. Next person, you know exactly where they are relative to the pot size and everything else. But I don't know so that's there. And then inconsistently, the chip graphics, chips behind is used, which it was the strangest thing. Sometimes they would show it, and sometimes they wouldn't. I don't understand why they wouldn't always have that be the case.
Yeah, and also sometimes they'd have graphic on the screens with chip counts, but it'd be like notable chip counts. It wouldn't necessarily be the top 10 in the field. I always like sort of seeing the top 10 in the field just because it gives us a sense of who the big names are. And I always like seeing, somebody who's the chip leader on day 4, whether or not they make it to the end or not. That's always interesting to see. So it was just very odd in terms of the graphics. I don't necessarily mind having it be in seed order. I think that kind of just helps me understand position a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, it's just very odd how they did the graphics, I think.
Other weird things, the hands are pretty much shown raw.
Yeah.
And for the most part, a 45-minute episode, I mean, nothing is shown out of order, but there might be like a chunk of time not shown, especially, for example, during day 7 of the final table, when there's, they have to cram in so much time into only some episodes. But the problem is, because the commentary isn't like edited, sometimes they're going to reference hands or things that happen that we didn't actually see.
Right.
So unless you saw the entirety of the live raw footage, you might be confused by some of the commentary, which hurts it because it's raw. They don't have time to like kind of spice things up in post-production. So there's not as many jokes, not as funny. It's a bit more repetitive. They don't really have the banter doesn't really escalate in any meaningful way as the tournament progresses. So that's also a big problem for those that are big fans of Norm. They don't embarrass themselves or anything. It's just not particularly exciting stuff from them in the booth.
Yeah, I mean, when Norm is talking live, he's not as energetic. He's a little bit more even-keeled, and he's not as spontaneous. So it's kind of nice to see that side of him a little bit, but after a while, it just gets a little too monotonous. I do like the rapport that Lon and Norm have with Jamie, and they're sort of, bickering back and forth a little bit in certain spots. That's interesting. And again, Jamie Kerstetter is a very effective commentator. I've seen some people compare her to Tony Romo because she's able to just predict how players are going to play hands, kind of like how Tony Romo is able to predict in NFL games how they play. I think she's, no problem with her or anything like that. She's a good addition to the team, even though I do kind of miss Antonio a little bit. I like his rapport with Lon.
I mean, I love Antonio, but there's a reason why he's not in the booth this main event. So I can sort of forgive that to a certain degree.
Right.
Too. And, Helmuth did pop into 2018 for the final table for a good portion of it, which I enjoyed. It would have been nice to have seen him, considering he busted out pretty early in this main event. But that's obviously Helmuth's schedule is only so free here and there.
Yeah.
You mentioned the notable stacks being they use the notable stacks graphic more than they use like the top chip count graphic.
Yeah,
and that's especially guilty of that in one of the early episodes that we'll discuss how frequently they showed that. So that's also part of the problem, is because they're just kind of taking a 45-minute chunk. The episodes kind of don't always run over the similar formula as far as what graphics they show when.
Right.
Use bits, etc., is out of balance because that's just what they were showing at the time. They were just, whenever you're trying to turn it live, you're kind of making up as you go in a lot of ways. So,
right,
something you also have to take into consideration. And I think possibly the biggest problem I have in this main event is close to zero action from the outer tables.
Yep. Bingo.
Now this main event starts on day 5, so there's a couple hundred players up, and by day 7 there's only one outer table, technically, really zero. But still, the outer tables is where so much of the comedy, the crazy hands really can take place, because some players tighten up on the feature table sometimes, and obviously when you have 24 tables, you're not gonna always have blockbuster worthy action on table 1 or table 2, but that really hurts. And oftentimes the featured table stays pretty much the same for an entirety of a whole day, which means you're really only seeing a one, 9 or 10 or 11 players from the tournament that entire run of episodes.
And really the emphasis is on the feature table. They have 3 tables cameraed and mic'd up and all that, but really the emphasis is on that one main table. And, if the main table is very interesting, okay, that's not a problem. But I'm with you. I want to know more about the players at the outer tables, who they are, what they're doing. You're completely right about the action at the feature table. And also the interview segments too. I mean, there's usually one per episode. You get a little bit of a sense of who the players are. But the interviews are very short. They're often just the player sitting in front of a green screen, chatting, answering one question, and then that's the end of it. They're completely different from the segments in years past where you get a sense of their personality. A lot of them aren't even smiling or sound like they want to be there, frankly. It's just it's soulless almost, I'd say.
I totally agree. And I guess if I'm going to get to the more small, minor gripes, this tournament, they started rolling out the bigger denomination chips a lot earlier. So
right.
Like day 5, some players have like 10 chips in front of them, including episode 1 had Richard Seymour, the former NFL Patriot Super Bowl champion. He was like one of the chip leaders at that table, and he had like 12 chips in front of him. It was an absolute joke how that worked out.
I know, right? I mean, it's also funny seeing these stacks of like a bunch of like $500,000 chips or $100,000 chips or whatever. There's just like $1 million chip. Like there's just something funny about that to me. I don't know why, but very odd.
Now that I'm sure there's another problem is that when a player gets knocked out, the graphic doesn't even tell them what place they were knocked out in. All it tells you is how much money they won. And like eliminated on day 6, $77,000. Like you want to see like when the field shrinks and eliminations kind of come one at a time. I don't think it's unreasonable for the production, especially when it was on a half-hour delay, to know what place a player got knocked out in, especially on day 7. I mean, 20
I'm with you.
left. They should really know this.
I'm with you.
And now they might actually say out loud, maybe Lon says, "Oh, it knocked out in 12th place or something." But I mean, it's just kind of annoying when you have to aren't just showing the graphic as you like to.
Yeah, I can understand after the bubble, a lot of eliminations happen at once. It's hard to tell who's got 990th place versus 993rd place. But at day 7, when you're down to the final 3 tables, you can give us each elimination as it comes around. Yeah.
There's probably a few more gripes I might remember as we go through each episode, but I think it's pretty clear that we are in full agreement. This is a very poorly handled main event on Poker Go.
Yeah, we're going to get through this whole season in one episode, guys. So, that just gives you a sense of where we feel about this.
Yes. Now, there are a couple of things I do appreciate to some degree in this main event. The first one being we kind of have a main character that goes from point A to point Z, which pretty much never happens. Like, you don't see Jamie Gold in episode 1, day 1 in 06 on the feature table and then win the whole thing. So that's kind of a rarity. It's a kind of a unique thing. And this broadcast does sort of demonstrate the monotony and the sort of the day-to-day flow of a typical tournament, I suppose, if that's the lens you choose to watch this main event through. But, I mean, entertainment-wise, I wouldn't say that's a good thing necessarily. But episode 1 begins on day 5. So, again, we're kind of at this point where we're starting from day 5 onward. From this is the last time, I guess, but nonetheless, this is where they wanted to start things off. And we have 2 sort of main characters on table 1. We have Richard Seymour, who we just mentioned, and Dario Sammartino, who will he'll just kind of be there, but not really like a big factor, even until at the very end. Like it's a pretty bizarre thing. I mean, until maybe the end of day 7, he's not really in the spotlight, despite being in the spotlight.
I know, it's weird, huh? And we're not trying to like insult his table play at all. He does. He manages to survive on a short stack for a very long time, does eventually put himself in a position to win, and things just don't go his way. But yeah, it is very interesting that we see so much of him. He's in so many hands. The commentators also talk about him a lot. He gets a lot of mentions because he's, a top-tier player. But yeah, we don't learn super much about his personality. We had a segment in this first episode where it's really just him saying like, I haven't been playing poker as much lately, and that's about it. We really know the most about him just from how much he shakes his head and how his facial expressions are, which I'm not trying to be mean to the guy. It's just very funny to just see him so emotive at the table. We don't really see that. Yeah. That's really it. It's very odd.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, table one really is the primary focus
Right.
of this episode, and it will be for the majority of all 15 episodes. Richard Seymour kind of gets involved with some very nitty, cautious plays, whether it's checking back the best hand on the river, whether it's folding the best hand to a shove. I mean, he's obviously in the final couple hundred players because he was playing well, and I can't criticize a player who probably has experienced God knows how many head blows in a decade plus of playing in the NFL. But again, props to him. We're Patriot fans, being from the Boston area, so obviously I was endeared to seeing him play. I did watch him live make some of those crazy folds pre-flop, so good for him, I guess. But then, most disappointingly, Mattisau on table 3 is just busts out in a hand we don't even get to watch.
Yeah.
Recurring trend, by the way, players going out, we don't see the hand at all. And in a blink and you'll miss it, our boy Mike Niwinski on table 2 is, shown in his, on the chip count at the top of the screen for table 2, but not actually in a hand. So that's his one cameo until day 7, unfortunately. And otherwise, it's just kind of a bunch of unmemorable hands with Dario and Seymour involved in a lot of them, and it's just kind of a really dull 46 minutes.
Yeah, I'll give Norm props. All of the Deflategate jokes for Seymour were pretty good. That's about it.
I mean, Seymour wasn't even a Patriot when they were in that game, so
yeah, I know.
A little misleading, but nonetheless. So episode 1 comes and goes. Episode 2 comes and goes as well. I mean, there's a slightly bigger focus on table 2 with guys like Jake Schindler, Chad Power, and Gary Gates being at that table. But again, it just kind of comes and goes. Seymour makes another big fold that actually was the right fold with Ace King pre-flop. But really, another unremarkable episode. If you're watching the first 2 episodes here and you enjoyed this, good for you. I would just kind of, on the movie Click, Adam Sandler fast forwards on autopilot with the remote. I was kind of on autopilot watching these episodes.
Same here. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see Gary Gates because obviously he'll be a big character later on. He also just seems like a really nice guy. So, props to him. Congrats for his deep run. We see a little bit of Brian Yoon. It's popped up before. Marchington does show up in this one, winning a big pot. Also, Serbic. I'm going to butcher that guy's name throughout this episode. I'm sorry.
Serbic.
Yeah, at 11.9 million chips. So he was a top leader for a while. But yeah, again, we don't really see too much when we just see Marchington rake in a pot. Gates, just kind of bounces around, but doesn't really do anything super exciting. Yeah, nothing really to write home about.
I mean, things get marginally better come episode 3, where we actually get a brand new featured table with Antonio Esfandiari, one of my favorites, headline things with also a couple other guys. Alex Livingston joins in later. And just from that first few minutes, Esfandiari is talking, the table talk juices are flowing. And even if the conversation is not, hilarious, it's still, there's a sword fight joke. There's a Burning Man reference there. At least, it's a bit more lively, whereas in the first 2 episodes, there was pretty much no table talk. It was just kind of dull, monotonous poker being played. And Esfandiari gets, again, involved in the action. He busts a player. Esfandiari gives a great face when he to his wife when he flops his opponent dead, and while his wife Amal Bunara / Esfandiari is watching. That was pretty funny too.
That was funny, yeah.
And there was a guy that says, does the old okay guys shoves and loses move where he has 2 pair against 2 pair. That's pretty funny, I guess. And again, so a couple of decent moments there on table 1, which again I mostly ascribe to Esfandiari being Esfandiari.
Yep, Joe Hashem's son was running deep in the tournament, so he came by and bought everybody pizza. I thought that was a nice gesture. I mean, Esfandiari versus Kevin Hart. I think that's the highlight of the episode for me.
That's pretty good too. I mean, I guess I would have guessed Kevin Hart would have lost because he's a lot shorter, and it's all about height and reach, I guess, involved.
Right.
But yeah,
that's funny.
And I think we forgot to mention that episode 2 they would show the notable stacks like 8 times.
Yeah,
it's the same 8-10 names every time. Nothing's changed. And it's annoying when when you're watching this live over like 6 hours on ESPN, but it's even worse when it's in a 46-minute span. Luckily,
Right.
they kind of backed down from showing that for the most part going forward, but that was so annoying when I had to watch that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no need to show that graphic over and over again. Show it at the start of the episode, show it at the end of the episode, and maybe once in the middle. That's all you need to do.
And then, so, day 5 is shown in 3 episodes total. And then, unfortunately, in between 3 and 4, Esfandiari drops like half his stack, so that when day 6 part 1 begins, he's at like 4 million chips when he had like 8 million at the end of day 5. And so that was definitely a shame. And then, so day 6 is really kind of the Sam Greenwood, to a lesser extent, Sammartino show, because they're both at that feature table for I believe all 4 episodes of day 6. And Sam Greenwood, he's got, I think like 22 million plus in live tournament winnings. So obviously he's a big player. I never heard of him. I mean, I consider myself to be relatively in the know in the poker scene. I didn't know about him back then. I didn't know about him in the 3 years since then. So, I mean, it's fine that he, is kind of the main character of that table for 4 episodes, I suppose. I mean, he plays pretty good. Some players definitely give away some silly chips to him, but this was as close to a kind of old school narrative in the main event as it really gets. As you see a top player like Sam Greenwood sort of hit a nice chip peak and then meet a surprise conclusion.
Yeah, very true. I didn't know too much about Greenwood either before 2019. We're not trying to insult the guy or anything. I mean, he's clearly a very talented player. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that he just pops up out of nowhere and you're expected to know who he is. It's, again, one of the other problems with starting on day 5 and having the editing style that you have. You're not giving these players a proper introduction. At least have an interview segment where Greenwood talks about his career. Put that right at the start of the episode. Hi, I'm Sam Greenwood. I started playing poker, so you have a sense of who he is as a player. That would have been nice. But, again, no hard feelings for the guy or anything. He did a great job throughout this. Yeah. But it's just his presentation needs to be better.
And then table 2 kind of has Foxen and Yuri Divalevsky kind of be the 2 big names at table 2. Table 3 not really kind of fades away from existence for the most part at this point.
Yeah.
And then this episode has our first Timothy Sue and Kevin Ma's sort of a cameo appearance. And actually, Timothy Sue does end up busting Chad Power, who had worn the same outfit every day, and then had a poll about what should he do with his vest or jacket after he busts, which is, again, some character coming through, but you don't really see much of Chad Power playing actual cards, so that kind of affects how effective that really is. On the very first hand this episode, Esfandiari gets unlucky against Sammartino and loses most of his chips, and then kind of in a nod to the year prior where he kind of effed off after being busting with top pair, he jokingly effs off and then comes back when he turns more outs, yelling, "One time!"
Yeah, that was funny.
Again, Esfandiari, even though he's, again, kind of had 2 deep runs kind of go south, he has been one of the more consistent sort of old school classic era main event performers compared to guys like Helmuth and Negreanu, who can't even seem to get past day 3 nowadays. So
very true.
Props to him for 2 deep runs in 2 of the bigger main events in history.
Yeah.
But again, even though I have a few Esfandiari points here to mention, it's another pretty dull episode. The action's very slow. That's also something we haven't really mentioned, that the actual number of hands per episode is way down.
Yeah.
Like, each hand is shown pretty much unedited. So the lengthy tanks, just the mechanical action of check, think, check, flop comes out. It drags on. It makes Will Kasuf's, episodes seem fast by comparison, because at least he was talking and there was a response to that.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of players doubling up in, a lot of raise folds and all that. And then, yeah, the hands themselves just aren't very interesting. There's not a lot of stakes. I mean, part of that has to do with it's day 6. We're not down to the nitty-gritty of the tournament yet. But still, I mean, you need to have a camera crew who films the outer tables and goes around so you can cut to those hands when the feature tables aren't as interesting. And also, you have 3 tables. I mean, just cut between the 3 tables. There's 3 hands going on at once. Surely one of them has to be a little bit intriguing. It's very strange how the 3rd table just drops out of focus for so much of this.
Not to mention, when we finally get a hand not at table one, it's often partially through, or as a player is busting and getting up from the table. It's not really the hand per se. We don't see the action before the chips go in or anything, so it's really poorly handled when they do finally cut away from the feature table.
Very true.
Episode 5, as Esfandiari is out and Hashem has also busted out, we have a bit more action focus on table 2 of some more, there's a crazy queens against kings hand where the queens hit a 1-outer on the turn to double up, which, kind of exciting-ish, but we get our first Hossein Ensan and Zen Kai appearance. So, again, sort of the check boxes of all 9 of our eventual final tables. I think by this point we have seen pretty much everybody at some point in the coverage. So at least we have that. If that's a positive, I mean, that's not the best thing in the world, but it's something. And we do get one name drop by Norm of Mike Novinski in the commentary. So he's now, flashed his name once at the top of the screen, now been mentioned by name once. So on Novinski Watch, that's our 2 points for him so far.
Yeah, I mean, this episode, it's very Foxen heavy, and he holds his own fine. I mean, there's nothing super special about the way he plays. It's interesting to sort of hear him talk about how he got concussions playing football, so he decided to transition and play poker. But, still nothing super interesting. Gary Gates talking about his life, that definitely gives a little bit more of his character, but I would have liked to have seen also a little bit more of his play. We still don't really know how he is as a player. They keep mentioning that he, worked for Poker Stars, but yet he's also a player liaison for Poker Stars, and he's also an amateur player. So, I mean, how does that impact his play? Is he better than the average amateur? Is he, where is his skill level at? We still don't really know. He's an unknown quantity.
No, I totally agree. And then episode 6 comes along, and is marginally better. There's a faster edit of hands in the early goings, mostly won by Sam Greenwood, ironically, who was from that 9 million up to 13 million, which, again, the blinds being 80K, 160K, 100, 200K. That's a fairly sizable stack. The table actually at one point discusses the big blind ante rules in relation to being a small stack. It's kind of funny, because if you are a super short stack and you're the big blind, and then you put your ante in first, you don't actually get any other chips if you double up, if you win the hand, because you don't have the ante goes in first. That's again part of that sort of slight strategy as you get really short that you must take into consideration. And then there's a couple of pretty amusing hands. One is kind of awkward because supposedly in the live feed there was a missing third flop card, but then we actually see what the third card is. So there's a kind of a discontinuity between what was happening live versus what we can see in the Poker Go version.
Yeah, it is odd, isn't it?
Yeah. And then Sam Greenwood gets paid off by a straight with a full house to accumulate more chips. And then there's some pretty good table talk, arguably the best table talk during a hand, where Foxen tells his foe, I don't think I played it bad, when he says I played this hand absolutely terribly, which ultimately resulted in a good fold being made by Foxen's foe. So again, one decent hand, but we need to see more than just one decent hand, at table 2 and table talk wise for this to really stand out as like a super highlight. But there's a pretty good ending of an episode, but it was a relatively dull start.
Yeah, I mean, we learn a little bit more about Zenkai being a best friend of Tony Miles, and how they actually were. He was his best man at his wedding. Yes. So we learn a little bit more about that relationship. It must be interesting making a deep run in the main event the year after your best friend almost won the whole thing. I mean, it's pretty, interesting to have that resource at your disposal.
Mm-hmm. Tony Smiles.
Tony Smiles.
And then episode 7 is probably the best episode of the first half of this main event, because this sort of informal narrative of Sam Greenwood's chipping up, he's playing great, comes and collides into the wall that is Timothy Sue, where Timothy Sue, who was the chip leader at this point in the tournament, runs a bluff of 10-9, which is an open-ended straight draw. That Greenwood's aces, is an 82% favorite to double up and hit 32 million chips, but Instead, Sue gets lucky, and Sue wins the pot and hits 45 million chips as a result.
Yeah, I mean, this was, if you were following the 2019 main event when this was airing, this was the big hand. I mean, they put it at the start of, the day 7 coverage. Like, this hand just happened, Greenwood, everything was going right for him, and now he busted, and it's on Poker Go, and it's everywhere on YouTube. It's a crazy hand to watch. This is one of the few times that letting the hands play out and not editing it down benefits it, because you really just get a sense of tension. And if you weren't, if you didn't know what the outcome of this hand was, I'm sure it would have been really interesting to watch this for the first time. So it does pay off well. And we do learn a little bit more about Stu. And he just seems like a very, casual guy during the hand. He's kind of smiling, laughing it off. He's got plenty of chips to work with. And after the fact, he's not, pumping his fist and bragging to his rail about it. He seems almost apologetic about what happened. So, it's a very sort of nice interaction that we learn a little bit more about Stu. And Greenwood, to his credit, also gets up from the table, wishes everyone well, and walks away. He doesn't shake everyone's hands like Esfandiari did, but he does seem gracious in defeat, which was nice.
And we actually get, even though they're just pre-flop all-in hands shown, some true outer table hands shown, more like how they would have in main event past, where the cards are shown, the cards run out, the player gets knocked out, whatever. They're actually shown back to back to back. So there was actually some effort to show those. There's only a handful of outer tables at this point, but to show some of the action there. So that was a relief that 7 episodes in, we finally had that kind of material to watch. And there's some pretty big hands by some of the future final tablists where they just can't quite make a fold with the inferior hand free throw, and the deck saves them, which just again shows you how lucky you have to get to really run deep. Even if you get some good cards, you really have to have the deck go your way as well. That is indicative of both Kevin Maz and Gary Gates, those hands. So again, it's a pretty good back half of this episode because of the action, considering that there really weren't a ton of bust outs really shown in the day 5 and day 6 episodes, if you think about it. Just to have a slew of eliminations like this is entertaining when the field is shrinking as much as it is, especially considering this is the last part of day 6. And in spite of this sort of rapid elimination streak, day 6 actually broke formula, and they didn't begin day 7 with 27 players. Instead, they left with 35, considering the pace of play and how far into the blind structure they were.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting place to stop. It's nice to break from formula a little bit, but it also just means that there's a lot that we have to watch through on day 7.
Or not watch in this case.
Or not watch, right.
We actually don't get to day 7 until partway through the action, where the field is down to 28 players. So again, 1 spot to go before the typical 3 tables of 9. But it's just really odd that we couldn't watch any of that action at all.
I know. It's just their hand selection just feels really off. I wouldn't mind it if they maybe had a little bit of a recap at the start of each episode explaining how players performed. It's very odd.
Not to mention, we don't even get a full chip count, chip stack graphic of all 28 players at any time. You have to kind of look it up on your own, which is a real shame. When again, one of the best parts of day 7 is seeing the starting chip counts. Who's in the top 9? Who's in the bottom 9? Who's in the exact middle? How far ahead is the chip leader? And then seeing how they, fare as day 7 goes on. The table shrink and the action gets more and more tense. Seeing, the chip leader was actually out first. That's really fun to watch and follow.
Yeah.
And we get that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, 100%.
And so Yuri Divalevsky hangs in there the best he can. Again, never really having a lot of chips. He ends up busting with ace-king against aces in 28th place. And so from that point, this is, again, partway into the episode, the tables will consolidate down to 3 tables of 9. And really the action is almost entirely table 1 at this point. I mean, I'm not suggesting that it should be a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split. But again, another one of the best parts of day 7 is seeing each table have its own flow, seeing who is, chipping up where, and how each narrative of day 7 is progressing relative to from each table, and that never really happens. There's only really the main highlight for me is that we get one Novinski hands. He makes, again, a fantastic read on his opponent, makes a great raise on the turn, and just takes it down before, any scary river cards can hit the board. And, Mike was in 8th place when day seven began with 28 left. So he was in, a pretty good spot to really make a deep run. Obviously, he didn't quite get that far, but that was where he began. And again, that was where my most rooting interest was in watching these episodes on day 7.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Corper, who I guess was an amateur or something, he was very underdeveloped, busts, and gets like a Kara Scott interview, and they try to like hype it up a little bit, but we barely knew who this guy was. Like, I don't even remember, like, who was he? Like, was he an amateur? Like, who the hell was this guy? Why is he getting so much attention in this episode?
Yeah, that's another good point, is that we really come to know these players absolutely zero. Like, we knew who this Esfandiari was, and his personality just shined through during his time in the feature table, but we don't get to know any of these players whatsoever. And even guys like Sam Greenwood, who was pretty much given a spotlight for 4 episodes straight about his play, doesn't really have much table personality presence or anything. There's no real interviews to kind of get into his head. And even Dario, I mean, he's got a bit more personality at the table, but he's also, for the most part, pretty quiet at the table, even if his fashion habits or his rail spice things up a little bit to the eye. We just don't know these players very well at all.
Yeah, I mean, Sue, we get another interview segment where, everyone's excited for him. His phone's blowing up and all that. We see, a little bit of his personality, sort of a happy-go-lucky amateur. He's very happy to make it that deep. That's really about it. I mean, in terms of Maz, we just see him get it all in, and he has a hangdog look on his face, and that's about it. We don't know much about Srbik. I mean, we've only mentioned him like once thus far because he's mentioned as a chip leader, and then that's about it.
Yeah.
We'll obviously see a little bit more from him as day 7 goes on. But yeah, I mean, we know very little about these players. And sure, like Ensign has, maybe his name if you've watched the EPT. Livingston had also been around for a little bit. Maybe they were assuming that people would know who they are. I mean, I don't know. I don't get what their logic was with this.
I agree. And possibly the third, like, of the 3 big day 7 sins you could ever have is you don't show each elimination.
Yeah.
Because we don't see 2 whole eliminations. An episode only has 4 in the whole thing, and we don't see half of them. That's just egregious as well. Bissell and Nawa, who were on table 3, so I guess there was no chance of us ever seeing them in action. That was also a problem here.
Yeah, just do a quick montage, bust out montage, showing each one as they bust.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And
so episode 9, arguably a bit better. It felt a bit more kind of classic day 7 and feel. There's actually a pretty fast pace of eliminations here. We go down from 24 players down to 17 by the end of this episode. And we actually get a good bit of Mike Novinski. I had a section on day 7 of just my Novinski watch. So anything related to him, I put about it. So he only had 13 million at the start of the episode. And he actually doubles up with Ace-King against Ace-Jack after Barton kind of goes nutty with Ace-Jack, which, again, if you recall, was the hand flipped from the hand that he busted out in 2016. And he even mentions to his rail, that's the same hand I had when I busted, only I had the Ace-Jack. So that was kind of funny. And it's even in the same level of the tournament when he busted in the 200K, 400K level. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, wow, crazy.
Yeah, and he still has to fade a flush draw after the flop, if you can believe that. But luckily, he hangs on, gets to 23 million, and then he runs into some bad flip luck against Kevin Maz, of course.
Yeah, I mean, just so close. If he can just win that pot there, he's in such good position to make the final. Can't say for sure he would have made the final table, but he's in such good position to make the final table. And especially Maz. I'm sorry, no offense to Maz. The tanking dude, come on. Like, come on, bro.
He basically folds his way to 5th place. Like, he just folds, gets aces, goes all in, doubles, folds again, chips back down, doubles up like coins against Ace-King. His entire rest of his tournament. So he was arguably the least impressive gameplay-wise from all the final tablists that we saw.
Absolutely.
That stupid ace on the river he banks against Mike didn't help things, from my opinion of him.
Yeah.
And then the other kind of notable happening on table 1 is the rise and fall of Nick Marchington. Mark actually hit 72 million chips. And if you had just seen the chip counts at the final table, you would have thought there was no way in hell Martinson would have ever hit that level of a chip stack. And then you see that he just hands it off to Ensign, which will be a recurring theme the rest of this main event, by the way. He just completely hands it off. He gives 25 million away on the river alone, and Ensign hits 100 million chips as a result of that massive misstep by the youngster Nick Martington.
Yeah, I mean, it's so sick to watch because Martington also came in as one of the top stacks. He could have been the youngest player to ever win the main event. He was just a little bit younger than Joe Cata. You know, it would have been so interesting to see what his final table performance would have been like, but such an unreal hand. And again, this is another hand where it does benefit to let the whole hand play out because you're wondering, you know, gee, Martington has bottom pair, you know, river bricks, maybe he'll just check and have showdown value. So to see him put out 25 million and Ensign snap calls with two pair is just so sick.
Mm-hmm. On the other two tables, there's only two hands are actually shown on table 3, despite the fact that there were 3 bust outs on that table. And of course, 2 of those 3 hands being the bust out hands. Sue gets pretty much another, you know, historic chip rise. He's over 100 million as well. So you kind of have Ensign and Sue over 100 million. Again, you kind of have one of those sort of disproportionate chip distributions where you have a lot of middling stacks and a couple of really big ones that we often see on day 7 of the main events every now and then. But you have elimination completely skipped, which when you're down to even under 20 players, they're just, how can you do that to the edit? It's just atrocious again.
Sick, yeah.
But, and to be fair, there's some pretty big action, a lot of Mike Novinski action on table 1. So I did appreciate that. And again, this makes it one of the better 2019 episodes. Which again, this has been a perfectly serviceable episode in a different main events. Here, it's like one of the highlights because of that. So,
right,
take it for what you will, as praise or not. And then, so episode 10, again, 17 players left, playing down to 12. They actually show the entire chip leaderboard at the start of the episode. I couldn't believe it. Like, about time.
Crazy.
With only 17 players left, though, that means you have 2 tables left. And you'll note that the chip distribution far favors table 1, which is bad for our boy Mike, because you pretty much have the 2 chip leaders, Sue and Ensign, and you kind of have everybody kind of else fighting around. So naturally, you're going to see a lot of those shorter stacks bust out because they don't really have any choice. They can't chip up steadily. They have to go for it all. And so you see guys like Austin Lewis, who we knew from Negreanu's 2015 feature table antics in that main event from then.
Right.
But with Mike, he begins in 14th place with 17 left, and then with just 14 left, he drops to the shortest at the feature table, but 12th overall. But he's not in this episode whatsoever.
Yeah, he's mentioned in the chip counts, and that's about it. I mean, this episode. Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, we get some more Gary Gates action. We see Gates double up through Ensign. We also hear him talk about a little bit about his play. So we're finally now starting to see him as a player develop a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, still just not really another exciting episode. I mean, Maz doubles up with aces again.
So it's funny because all the players that bust out in this episode, we didn't see a lick of them before this episode.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the 17th through 13th place finishers in the main event. That would have never happened in 2012, 2014, even 2008. We would have already seen all these guys at some point, and their bust outs just mean nothing to me. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing to say about them. I don't know who Rao is. I don't know who, Dalawal is. I don't know who any of these players are.
Yeah, and that's really a shame when you're, 2 episodes away from the final table. You want to know who's coming up just short.
Yeah.
But to be fair, if episode 10 was designed to make us feel as unemotional as possible about the outcome of the episode 11 is perhaps one of the most special episodes, like for us just watching, because we've talked to Mike about this main event a little bit here and there, and this is his episode. For better or for worse, he is the character featured in the introduction. He's in the most action at the table. He's the only one to bust out in this episode. This is as close to a Michael Novinski trademark episode as it gets.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting that they decided to give him this much screen time. He deserves it because this is second big run in 4 years, getting 12th place. Very personable guy, and again, just so many spots where if just hands go a little bit differently, we can't say for 100% certainty he would have made the final table, but he would have really had a good shot at making it and possibly, really running it up. It's just so frustrating. It's just like have his hand hold up once, call the bet, just so many times where it's like just so close.
He had a very tough table when you have a couple of huge chip stacks.
He did, yeah.
Winning every hand. And again, Mike was never super, super short, big blinds wise, but just relative to the whole table, he was always one of the short stacks. And, props to him for hanging in there. Again, 12th place is fantastic. He makes an amazing fold that the booth was shocked that he was able to make, where he folds top pair to Ensan straight correctly for his tournament life, which for some reason they didn't want to show us the whole hand before that fold, but I guess you can't have everything you want. And then he wins a flip against Ensan with pocket nines against ace king, which gets him about 24 million, so 40 big blinds, which puts him in 8th place at the virtual final table, which is pretty nice. But then he gets bluffed by Sue, and then folds tens with action with 2 players all in pre-flop of ace king, and he would have won the whole thing there, which again, it's a tough spot. You're playing like two-handed. You're best case scenario they had the same hand, but they're mathematically likely to have ace queen, 2 jacks, something like that. You don't. I can respect that fold, but then because he hasn't won any of the other hands, he has 18 million chips of ace king. The blinds are 400K, 800K, 23 big blinds. He goes for it. It's a $200,000 flip as well against Lou because they're on a pay bubble. And sadly, he can't even be drawing live after the flop because Lou flops a full house.
Just hurts.
It hurts. He actually trades phone numbers with Timothy Sue as his way out. But Mike, it was a great run. I just wish we could have seen more of it before this episode. He was in 3 hands before this episode, which is like almost insulting to the 12th place finisher to not give us a bit more of that narrative.
Yeah, I know. It's just heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very sad ending. It's not the best episode in the world, but it's one of the like most ironically greatest episodes I've ever watched. It's
right, yeah.
It's a weird feeling, and so again, it's an episode of an asterisk. It's like an A of an asterisk. So is it really an A then?
Yeah.
And then we get episode 12, which is the final episode before the final table. 11 players playing down to 9, and I'm just going to say it's one of the weakest final episodes of all time. What do you think?
I'm with you. I mean, there's definitely a couple interesting spots. Like, the first hand between Ensan and Sue is definitely interesting. We have that infamous moment where Sammartino calls Marchington's $17.2 million. Oh, sorry, $22.2 million chip shove. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, again, the problem that I have with it is I want to know who the 10th place finisher is. So when Hydorn busts, I don't care because I don't know who he is. Yeah. And also I want to get a little bit better sense of what the final table bubble was like. We only see a couple of hands. I want more tension there. I want more detail there, and it's just not there.
Especially after the amazing final hand of 2018. I mean, I will give this episode credit. We have 2 of the best hands of the whole tournament in it, where Sue hands over, half his chips with top pair. Where I guess if you want, we could discuss that hand because that's a pretty crazy hand. But I think Sue should have folded because it's Ensan and he doesn't really bluff really at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Sue knows that Ensan never bluffs, but considering he basically had top 3 stack at the final table locked up, and he gave up that to Ensan of all people. He really, really shouldn't have done it. And also, that hand eats up the first quarter of this episode, by the way. So it's a big hand, but that's 12 minutes of TV, essentially. And it's just too much for one hand to show.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big hand. It's a big change in chip stacks. I mean, I'm with you. So you should have folded top pair there. It's a tough fold to make, but yeah, Enson had been playing so rock solid. He hadn't gotten out of line. He was picking premium hands. I think you should have read into it that he had a set. I mean, you really need to just get rid of the hand there and move on to a better spot. And even if you think maybe you can beat Enson, I mean, just wait for a better spot.
Mm-hmm.
He's such a talented player. Why give him so much more chips?
And then the other big hand, of course, being Dario Martinson. And we, again, discussed this with Mike plenty. And particularly, it's the kind of the needle that Jack gives Dario. If you're calling 17, you're calling 22. And then Dario's like, did you just hear that? And then even the table kind of chimes in. I think that was just, Jack's the higher up, but that's just a needle he should not have said. And I think that Dario, I think he probably was going to call the all-in.
Yeah.
But you want it to be your full autonomy. You don't want your autonomy in a situation to be taken away by somebody higher up than you, maybe overturning something that should have been not overturned.
Subtle.
Thank you.
And to be fair to Marchington as well, like he handled it very well. He expressed to Sammartino, I'm with you, and didn't, when the river bricked out, because there was a slim chance we almost could have had a chopped pot and it all would have been okay.
It's actually a pretty good run out for Dario, and he had no overcards to his tens. He turns a straight draw and a chop draw. So, it's like, a little bit of karma coming back to him. It wasn't the worst spot. If he had jacks, he would have been in the worst spot than with tens. So you could look at it that way too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of interesting. Marchington handles it well. I think even Livingston, kind of like says, River would make, would be justice or whatever. I think you can even hear Jamie groan as the river bricks out. It's just a very odd, funny hand. And then, yeah, you're calling 17, you're calling 22. It's just such a weird thing for Jack to say. If Jack had just come to the table, said, this is what the rule is, you have to stick by it, no problem. Then he says that. It's just, ugh.
But then, as entertaining as this hand is, it really, really sucks when the action swoops over to a hand already in progress where Lou is busting.
Yeah.
Why can't you just, go to a fake commercial and then show the full Lou bust-out hand? This is 11th place. I want to actually see that hand. I mean, I'm not saying that you should cut it from Dario's hand. That's very important to show that. But, I mean, that was an atrocious editing choice to do it like that.
Yeah, and again, we didn't know who Lou was.
We saw him play a little bit here and there. A little bit. He did bust Mike, for example. And it's kind of funny how the guy that busted a player in 12th goes out in 11th. Like, how's that happen?
I know, right?
That always seems to happen in poker. Like, the next person out goes out next. And then, again, Hyador gets the least important bust out in 10th place. So, again, it's a pretty slow edit for this episode. Obviously, there's a couple of big hands. And there's some tension there, but again, there's so many, like Marcel Lewis busting out in 10th, Carlos Mortensen busting out in 10th, Rich Zhu in 10th. There's some memorable 10th place finishes I can recall. This episode does not even come close to that.
Yeah, and then, we end with Enson having 177 million in chips, Gary Gates having 99 million, so this is Enson's to lose. Marchington, the short stack at 20 million, and Sue just barely above him in 20 million. And a special mention to Srbik, who's at 23 million, when on the previous episode, he was shown having 80 million. So what the heck? What happened to him? We don't get any sense of his story. We see him play a little bit, but what happened?
It's just really disappointing. And obviously when you have, even though Gates had little over half of what Enson had, you kind of had the two top dogs, very similar to what John Hesp and Scott Blum's situation. And again, the blinds being 500,000, 1 million. So those bottom three stacks really kind of handcuffed by by having 20 big blinds. Really, it's hard to play poker. I mean, I don't know. I think it's kind of overblown sometimes how few 20 big blinds is. People are so eager just to 3-bet shove 20 big blinds. I don't agree with that necessarily, but and unfortunately, the bottom three stacks will be the first three players out in this final table. So that's always kind of dull when that happens. And the top two stacks stay in the top two for that first night. But we're gonna ahead of ourselves a little bit here. Episode 1. This is a 3-part final table. Again, they broke it into 3 nights. So it's supposed to be 9 to 6. or I guess maybe it was 9 to 5, but they went from 9 down to 5 that first night, 5
Right.
down to 3 on night 2, and then night 3 down to a winner. And surprisingly, the first night, again, pretty short. They only played a total of 56 hands.
Yeah.
4 players. And, we saw Ivy in 09 survive almost 100 hands to in 7th. So that just shows you how much faster these players are busting out. And the most baffling part about this first episode is they actually just show 3 raise and takes at some
I know, right?
The weirdest thing. Now, to be fair, the very first hand is a raise and take. I guess if you want to show the very first hand, I can kind of forgive that. I get it. Shove up and deal. Everyone's sitting down. Okay, we'll show the first hand. It's a boring hand, but sometimes the first hands are boring. I get that. But then to do that 2 more times, it's just boring. It's not entertaining for a final table episode.
And oddly enough, they're all Gary Gates hands. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that was trying to set the stage for how his story wrapped up, or it was supposed to develop his character.
Right.
I don't mind you have, one raise and take hand, and that's sort of a lead into a segment. And there is a segment of Gates talking about his rail. But 3, it's just very odd.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say that watching a final table in this sort of live or bridge structure does feel subjectively better than watching day 5 like this, because it's a bit more like you're watching the final table live, because it's the final table live, which is how you'd watch normally. So that's not really a much of a problem impressionistically. But then, to my surprise, they introduced a 5 million chip in relatively early, so that a guy like Gary Gates has a tall stack, over half of his chips are just in a stack of 5 million chips. This is very strange to have it that early. And there were quite a few big hands at the table that were just skipped entirely in favor of throwing in these raise and takes. You could have excised those 3 raise and takes and put in one really good hand that actually happened.
Right, exactly.
Been totally cool with that.
Yeah, it's just very odd. To be fair, I guess they were handcuffed by the fact the bottom 3 stacks busted first.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I just feel like, you should be prioritizing interesting hands over just showing raise and takes or showing Gary Gates. You have hand selections, just make better selections here.
And they only show 11 hands in this episode. 3 of them are raise and takes. That leaves 8 left. 3 of them are bust out hands. So that only leaves really kind of 5 hands to sort of show a whole final table dynamic, and that just is not enough, if you ask me.
Yep, and then it's not helped by Maz tanking multiple times, which apparently was a way, I read somewhere, it was a way for him referring to the Dario thing from the previous day. I don't know, just very odd. They kept mentioning how many haters he had too. It was just very strange.
The second hand of the night in the episode, Dario 3-bet shoves pocket 8s, and then after he shoves it, Maz is next to act, and he has I forget, 8-7 or something ridiculous, and then he takes his usual. He takes his cards, looks at it, puts them over the reader, slides them over, takes some chips, kind of riffles them a little bit, thinks, and then folds. And he'd do that every single hands, and it was just so annoying. And the table kind of calls him out on it actually, and then the booth kind of gets on that train as well. And it's even more annoying watching Maz tank in a 46-minute episode when you want this high action final table drama, and it hurts the entertainment value again.
They need to have a rule against repetitive tankers where if they do something like that, you're allowed to call the clock on them after 30 seconds or something.
Mm-hmm. And then there was one bit I liked where they showed the top 3 stacks also being the top 3 oldest players in the field. That was kind of amusing.
I guess so, yeah.
You don't often see that. But again, it was a pretty weak part 1 of the final table. I really did not like this episode overall. And luckily, episode 14 is a bit better. They actually make it a pattern to actually show 5 of the very first 8 hands of that night, so you kind of see how the action got off the runway. And there's some pretty good action. There's some bluffs. Ensan pulls off a bluff. Dario wins a flip, blind versus blind. Stuff like that is pretty good. Dario was kind of the underdog in a lot of ways. He was in the middle of the chip stack leaderboard, but well below the average, and was kind of hanging in there. And so the fact that he was kind of maintaining the same sort of pace of play that he had been the whole tournament, where he was kind of in there but not really in there, was very impressive.
Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, he was riding the short stack through much of the night. I mean, to end the first night, he had 23 million in chips. So, I mean, he was doing great work just finding spots for himself, hanging in there, letting Gates just kind of destroy himself as this episode really is the fall of Gary Gates. Very painful.
It is, and you know, I kind of got a Nick Mannion vibe from Gary Gates, where he's just kind of trying too hard. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of chips. You don't have to. It's not. It's okay if your chip count stays plateaus because you're maintaining a healthy stack. And Son is running away of things, and you know the rest of the players are going to follow suit going out if you allow that dynamic to continue, and you're still hanging in there for 100 million plus chips. I mean, he chipped up from that 99 million on that first night, almost doubling it to 172. So
Yeah.
again, 5 players left. He was very, very well ahead of the other 3 players below him, and he wasn't that far behind Ensign either.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't. To end the first night, he was at 171 million and Son 207. So just one hand, and he's got the chip lead. And it almost seemed like in the commentary, you know, especially remembering how it was live, it was almost as if they were saying like it's going to be Ensign versus Gates head up. They almost just were implying that it was going to be those two.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee that even with that big stack, you're going to do well. And then the Ace 10 versus King 9 hand, I mean, just holy crap. I mean, just crazy.
Yeah. Gates just sinks and sinks, and that's really kind of the main theme of this episode. Kevin Maz kind of like folds his way to 5th place. I mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
From like day 7 at hand 1, he folds his way to 5th place. It's pretty incredible how that worked out. And again, he might be a nice guy in real life. I obviously don't know him, probably never will. But I just have to ask, what was his plan really? Like, is he just never really? Actually, there was one great hand that Doug Polk in his poker vlog talked about where there was a hand against Zen Kai where Zen Kai had 3-bet with King 8 against Maz Ace Jack, and then Zen Kai shoves King High, and Kevin Maz like actually almost calls the base high after a long tank, but then it gets clocked by somebody else because of his, you know, he had a real decision, but then he couldn't. I would have loved to have seen that hand in the edit here, but we were not given that hand in the description. They rather show the raise and takes. So.
Yeah, I remember there was one hand, it wasn't in the episode, where Maz is tanking pre-flop and Gates called the clock on him. That was pretty satisfying to watch live.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, speaking of Zenkai, he busted last episode and we didn't mention it.
I'm sorry. I know he's so memorable, the character. That's why we did that.
Yeah, it just goes to show just how undercharacterized these guys were.
And Sam, I counted how many hands were in episode 14. You want to know how many?
How many?
9.
Yeah.
9 hands this whole episode. It's unbelievable. Just the pace of showing hands is so slow that we'd only get 9 hands is it's just terrible.
Yeah, and the bust outs occur back to back right at the end of the episode. No real suspense with either of them, no real intrigue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Maz busts and then Gates busts. There is, I will say, the Kara Scott interview at the end with Gates is legitimately heartwarming. Like to hear Kara Scott asking, you know, what went wrong, and Gates says nothing went wrong, we won. Like that was really touching to me. Granted, slightly undercut by Dario Sammartino. You can see jumping around in the background with his rail celebrating. It undercut it a little bit, but it was still, that's like one of my favorite heartwarming moments of the main event.
Mm-hmm. I'm totally defend that. That's totally legit. So with 3 players left, Alex Livingston, who has had a pretty darn impressive 2022 so far, is in 2nd place. He kind of chips up after busting Gates. Ensign, 327 million chips, so about 60-ish% of all the chips in play. Dario is up. He's up to 68 million, which is still, again, well below his 2 foes as the final 3. And it's actually a pretty exciting first half of episode 15, the final part of the final table. And then the second half, not as fun. But the first half, we get some pretty good drama as Dario doubles up with Ace Jack against Ensign in a flip. And he hits the river, of all things, after Alex had folded the identical hand to Dario pre-flop. So it's always kind of amusing when that happens. And then but unfortunately, there's a lot of jumping around in this episode, because the first 2 parts only spanned 120 hands. This 3rd part spans almost 200 hands.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hand skippage, particularly heads up, but also there's a 50 hands in between the first, second hand shown in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, this was really disappointing for me watching this episode because I really loved these final three. I thought they all had played very well up till this point. And they gave Ensign a run for his money, and he actually lost the chip lead a couple times. Any one of them really had a shot of winning this thing three-handed. It was really exciting to watch. And yeah, I mean, we get a couple of exciting hands here or there, but I'm really disappointed with how little coverage we get of Livingston in particular, and not too much about Dario having the chip lead against Ensign heads up. We just see him get the chip lead and then essentially give it back, which is disappointing. Would have liked to, see an Ensign chipping up during that heads up battle.
Yeah, and the actual heads up battle is the final 2/3 of the episode, and there's one very big pot early on heads up that Dario wins, which gives him the chip lead, and really at that point no one would have blamed you for thinking Dario could pull it off. But then from there, Ensign just kind of runs Dario over, getting better cards, favorable runouts. At one point, Ensign wins a pot of 8 high when Dario had 7 high, and neither of them wanted to bluff the river. And so that was pretty amusing. And then the very next hand is actually the final hand of the whole thing. So it's a pretty good beginning and it's okay ending, but the middle part of this episode was really kind of a letdown, considering just how much they had to skip. And we've seen some great final 3 poker play. Obviously, 2012, Merson, Sylvia, and Belsinger was a great example of that. And but Ensign with Kings, the first time Kings is ever the winning hand for the main event against Dario's overplayed combo draw. I mean, I get why some folks would think you want to shove the combo draw, but I also don't think that when you're heads up for $10 million, or I guess $4 million, I'm not shoving 8 high. Sorry.
Yeah, me neither.
I think you gotta fold it and move on. Save your chips. And so from there, that is, I guess, everything about 2019. Now, the one benefit that this structure of episodes is that the episodes really kind of fly by pretty fast. I mean, we're obviously watching at 2x speed. They fly by pretty fast because there's not much to really pay attention to, so you just kind of let it roll on now, not touch to really take notes about. But it's just really a overall very much of a letdown for the last true main event experience, episode by episode, that we've had. It's a big letdown.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not much to say. There's a couple memorable moments here and there, Greenwood, Sue, couple of hands at the final table, but nothing really you can hang your hat on. No big personalities make it deep. We don't even really know much about these guys' lives or their experience in poker, and the lack of segments. There's no, side action championship. There's no nuts. There's just no sense of fun in this. It really just feels like they just said, all right, we got to just put these episodes out. Let's just take our live coverage, cut some hands together, and throw it in. It's just really a lack of passion and a lack of effort. I never want to watch any of these episodes ever again, frankly. I mean, I'll watch a couple clips here and there, but it's just very dull.
It's funny. I had hoped that if we ever re-interviewed Mike about 2019, we could, maybe break down some of the hands he played. But even those, there's like nothing really to analyze. Like there's arguably one hand where that wasn't like a pre-flop all in that he was in that maybe would be worth talking about. But even then, it's just so hard to parse out something to really talk about or to latch on to.
Exactly.
Even my favorite episodes from this run is really like even by 2018 standards, nothing to be impressed by. And we thought that was the worst one. This one easily eclipses 2018 as the weakest main event.
Absolutely. This is a D for me.
See, I think I gave a D to 2018, so I have to go like a little bit lower. I won't give it an F because there's still some merit here and there. So I'll give it, I guess, a D minus. But I mean, this is bottom tier of 2018 for the worst 2 main events by far. I'd watched 0304, 2013 over this hands down. Obviously, this is 3 years ago, so and it's only really one true main event ago.
Right.
So it's as close to modern day main event historically as it gets right now, unfortunately. But I was let down.
Absolutely.
But I guess back to our point about modern poker. So discussing the 2022 World Series of Poker so far. Anything jump out at you as far as anyone's play or anyone's achievements?
Well, Phil Ivey has made a bit of a comeback. He got second place in the $100,000 high roller tournament.
He blew that one. He should have won that one. He totally blew it. I couldn't believe it.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, it's sort of nice to see him back. He's made a couple deep runs here and there. We also have Stephen Albini, who some of you may recognize as the producer for Nirvana and a lot of rock bands, winning his second bracelet. So that brings a little bit more attention to the game, I hope. Congrats to him. And then, Daniel Negreanu getting extorted for $1 million. No big deal. I think apparently he's reported that to the FBI, which he should probably do.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And
not a ton. Like last year, Negreanu and Helmuth both had very exciting runs in a lot of the early events. None of them have really had a ton of success. I mean, Helmuth did have COVID, so he was out for a week plus, which is unfortunate. But Mass has made a couple of semi-deep runs, I guess. Obviously his vlogs are mostly angry, upset at himself at this point. Maybe they'll turn around later. I haven't been as impressed by the Poker Go live streams of these final tables as I have been in the past. A lot of very slow play.
Yeah.
They've altered the blind structure for a lot of for most of the events, and I think that makes the game a little bit less fun as well. They'll have a blind structure where the blinds will be like 100K and 150K.
Mm-hmm.
Like just weird. Like they've excised like the 8-16 and the 6-12.
Yeah.
Like that rotation of blinds, which you gotta have those, man. It's just standard.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And they've obviously they're at Bally's, so they entirely new chips. But it's like they went to like a Skittles factory and just like, oh, we'll have that flavor and that flavor for this tournament. And then we'll have some greens. I hate the chips. I love the old school chips. I don't think they ever should have changed those. I should have just gone from the Rio, just taken those chips and put them over at Bally's, maybe painted the word Bally on it, and gone from there. But they. So I would be definitely let down if I was in the main event and they didn't have the usual chips.
Yeah, one of the things I don't like as well about how PokerGo is doing it is they'll have like a main table where you're watching the final table of the particular tournament you're watching, and then they'll just like pan over, and then off to the side there'll be a separate final table on the secondary table. It'll just be for a completely different tournament. Why not broadcast both? If you have the cameras set up over there, why don't you do both at the same time? They've had Ivy over there and all sorts of players over there. Just very odd.
And they'll cut to that table for like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh, we have over there, we have him in the chip lead, and let's not cut back to one. Don't bother if you're not going to show anything from there. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and speaking of Dario in the 250,000 super high roller no limit event, he is currently third. Phil Ivey is number 2 in that event. We also have Karai Aldemir. We have Adrian Mateos leading the field, Vogelsang, Bonomo, Andrew Roble, David Einhorn, Daniel Negreanu. So there's a lot of top name players in that event, Sam Sobral as well. So hopefully, one of them will make a deep run in that one.
Yeah. I mean, again, Corey Alderman's having a pretty good sort of title defense, even though we're not at the main event quite yet. It's in a couple weeks, or really less than 2 weeks, actually.
Yeah.
Our boy Adam will be at the main event, and of course our other boy Mike will be in there. So hopefully they'll be heads up for the whole thing, and that'll be, very exciting to watch that, playing for $16 million together or something. Other than that, I mean, I don't think we're playing poker anytime soon, so we don't have anything on that front for us to announce. Maybe we'll figure something out. I think next up in our sort of rewatch schedule, for the first time, we'll have to watch the 2020 main event, and we'll discuss how that sort of all came about, I guess, in that episode, because that was a unique main event in many respects, and it's only 4 episodes long, so we might watch something else alongside with it to kind of fill out a whole podcast. So we'll discuss, if you guys have any suggestions for what something else on the shorter side to kind of coincide with the 2020 main event, let us know, and we'll consider that too.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, neither Ben nor I are going to the main event this year, just because we're both busy with work and all that. But we'll be trying to follow it as much as we can. Obviously, if Adam makes a deep run, final 3 tables, I'll try to see if I can get out there. And then if it's Adam and Mike heads up, I'm going to lose it. Like, oh my God. I'll have to wear like half Adam shirt and half Mike shirt. It'll be very awkward.
If that happens, then it's clear that it'll be, because Norman should have had his Starburst players or his Redhead brigade. It'll just be our interviewed brigade. I don't think Hesp or Cotton will be in the main event this year, but we'll have our 2 horses in the race, and hopefully they'll at least one of them will make a deep run. But I'm fairly confident they'll both be in the swing of things.
Yeah, it'll be fun definitely to see. There's a lot of speculation that this year will exceed '06 in terms of how many players there are. I mean, a lot of these tournaments are packed with people. The seniors event has like 7,000 people in it, according to WSOP website. So who knows? I mean, we might very well top 9,000 this time. The Colossus right now apparently has like 4,500 people. So, you know, who knows?
Not the first flight, so it'll get up there.
Yeah.
This could be, you know, very possibly a record-breaking World Series of Poker. Obviously, anything can happen between now and then. Gas prices going up. Maybe people should have more spending money to spend on poker. They in Vegas, you know. But we'll see. Again, anything's possible. And I got a shout out to everyone who watched our Cotton Snuffer interview last time. We had a great reception there. Again, we're happy everyone enjoyed that episode. It was one of our most watched and most number of hours listened to. So that was fantastic. I'm glad that people are really connected with that interview. And again, we're going to try to get more interviews in the future. Obviously, you know, tackling one guest at a time. I had reached out to somebody from 2019, haven't heard back, so that's probably going to be a challenge. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, we've both really liked the interviews. Again, thanks to Adam and Iverson for, you know, agreeing to speak with us. You know, we didn't pay them or anything, so they came on their own free will. We gave them time to plug stuff. So, you know, we're definitely happy to do more interviews with anybody from any WSOP event or any poker at all, any Mind Sport Olympiad players. We're happy to have you on the show as well to talk about your performance. And yeah, we try to keep things very free form and open-ended. We'd love to hear your stories, what your feeling about the game is. You don't have to talk about current poker events or anything like that. Just, you know, if you'd like to be on the show, let us know and we'll work out a time.
I mean, we're always plugging if you're on TV at some point. We don't want to talk about it, but also if you just want, you know, to rant about modern day poker news, we talk about it every now and then, but we're happy to mix things up and talk about that too. So really, anyone's welcome to join us and be the third fish at the table.
Yeah, and I guess because this is the 1 year episode, I guess we'll have to do the whole schmaltzy. Thank you all for staying with us this long. Yeah, it's been a blast doing this, and obviously, you know, we're starting to run out of main events, so we'll have to move on to something else. And you know, we'd really like to hear from you. As you know, Ben and I both have ideas for future episodes. If you want us to talk about other WSOP events, we've talked about covering the big one for One Drop. We could also cover something else. We covered the '08 horse event previously. So you know, if you want WSOP, if you want EPT, if you want high stakes poker, if you want poker movies, whatever, just let us know. We're happy to take your suggestions and see what we can do about that.
Yeah, I think that just about wraps this one up. Episode number 30, the big 3-0. I turned 30 last week, so it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Everyone, thanks for listening. Enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
Best wishes.